Introduce our next speaker. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Eric Olson. I serve as BSR's Senior Vice President for Advisory Services. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our first company plenary of the conference with a company that I think couldn't be better suited and a person better suited for the task. You may know or think you know this company as Waste Management, Inc. I think by the time David is done speaking and the time we've had a few minutes to talk about it, you may rather think of this company as the Hub. The Hub. And I got, David, that's free, as long as with attribution. The Hub. Let me tell you a few words about David, then I'm going to invite him up. He's going to speak, show us a video, and then I'll join him for some conversation. And I want to get you involved in the conversation, so please be thinking of your questions. So first, David. David is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Waste Management. Before taking that job, he did just about everything else there. I saw Chief Financial Officer. I saw General Counsel in particular. He's trained as an attorney. So before joining Waste Management, he was a partner at a law firm in New Orleans, Phelps Dunbar. And before that, with another one closer to here, San Jose, California. He's a JD from UCLA. A BA from LSU, go Tigers. Don't ask him about the Alabama game coming up this weekend. I did, and it was a big faux pas. So David's very engaging, and he's going to tell us some stories in a couple areas that I think you'll find really interesting. One is the incredible transformations that this company has gone through, that he has had to lead this company through into its current shape, and also the central role that networks play in their business and in them addressing some of the challenges that they, and indeed we, need to be taking on in the coming years. I hope we will also have time to talk a little bit about leadership. It's always interesting, I think, for our audience, a lot of CSR practitioners and other people, to hear a little bit from a CEO how they think about the role of leadership and then what the role of their teams is and can be in bringing things to the boss and helping executive management move forward as effectively as they might. So we'll talk a little bit about leadership, and David finally also has some really interesting views on the nature of leadership and management and the need, and I got this from something you wrote not too long ago, the need to manage with as opposed to against human nature. So we'll find a little bit more about what David means by that. Please join me in welcoming David Steiner. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. And obviously, I want to thank Eric, Aaron, the whole BSR team for bringing all of us together here at the Hyatt Embarcadero, one of the great properties in San Francisco, which is truly one of the great cities in the world. You know, sitting this morning, walking over, I thought, you know, if it's a small group, we're going to go do this outside because the weather's so perfect. But I think we might have too big of a group to try to do that. But I want to start off by talking a little bit about the theme. You know, as I was coming here, getting prepared, I was thinking about the theme of this conference, right? The theme of the conference being the power of networks. And I started to think, you know, what exactly is a network? Now, you know, I'm a simple CEO, so I can't make very complicated definitions. But I thought, you know, basically a network is generally a group of people that gather generally around a common goal. And so there are lots of networks with common goals, right? My kids go to school. There is a network around their school. You know, there might be a network based around sustainabilities in your community. Make California greener, make the United States greener, make the world greener. There are a lot of different networks that have common goals. But when you look at those networks and you start drilling down, you realize there's a lot of sub-networks. And even though the overall network might have a common goal, those sub-networks don't necessarily have common interests, right? And so when I look at it, waste management deals with a lot of different networks, and I'm going to talk about how we interact with some of those networks and how we realize that they may have a common goal among those networks, but everyone in that network has a different interest. And how do we use what we do as a company to meet those differing interests in a common network? And so, you know, the question becomes, how do you understand more about those networks so you can meet their needs? Everyone in those networks has a unique type of need. And what we've tried to do at Waste Management is try to get in and understand those unique needs and meet them. But before I talked about that, I wanted to give you just a little bit of information about Waste Management and what we're all here to talk about today, which is a network based around sustainability. And Waste Management truly, at its core, is a company that drives sustainability. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about the overall goals that we have at Waste Management and how we're doing against those goals. We created 4 broad-based goals about 4 or 5 years ago, and here's what they are. First, we're the largest recycler in the United States, probably the largest recycler in the world. 5 years ago, we did about 6 million tons of recyclables. That's enough to fill the Transamerica building, I think, 50 times over. So as the largest recycler, we said, we have a goal to try to become even bigger, try to become even better. And so our goal was to recycle 20 million tons of recyclables by 2020. How have we done? So far, in the last 4 years, we've doubled the amount of recyclables from about 6 million tons to about 12 million tons. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit later about what we can do to drive that goal from 12 million tons to 20 million tons by 2020 and actually try to drive it over the long term even further than that. The second is to double the amount of waste-based energy that we produce. Folks don't realize this about Waste Management, but we, at the core, are a waste company. But one of the things that we actually are is an energy company. Now, when you think about renewable energy, you don't generally think about garbage. You think about things like solar or wind power. An interesting fact for you, Waste Management, just one company, Waste Management, we actually create more electricity from waste than the entire solar industry in the United States. The entire solar industry, and it's not even close. We produce about 2 to 3 times more power than the entire solar industry in the United States just out of waste. Our third goal is to reduce the emissions out of our fleet by 15% by 2020. Now, the good news here is that we've actually achieved this goal way ahead of target. This year, we've reduced emissions out of our fleet by 20%. So, as a CEO, what do you do when you meet your goal? Do you have a party and say we're done? Yeah, you have a party, but you never say you're done. And so what we'd said is we're going to make a new goal, right? And I think by 2020, we can reduce the emissions in our fleet by over 50%. I'd love to see us reduce the emissions in our fleet by over 75%. And that's what we're going to be shooting for by 2020, to at least get 50% less emissions out of our fleet every year. And then the final goal that we have is a goal of turning all of the sites that we have throughout the United States. For years and years and years, we've been picking up waste and disposing of them in sanitarily safe landfills. Now, those landfills can't be used for development, but what can they be used for? They can be used for a lot of different things. We chose to make them into wildlife refuge. And so our goal was to have 100 of our sites, about 25,000 acres, turned into wildlife refuges. I'm glad to say that we've also exceeded that goal early. 134 of our sites, about 28,000 acres, have been certified as wildlife refuges. But we don't want to stop there. We certainly don't want to take those goals and say we've now achieved them, we're not going to do any more. We're going to continue to do more, and we're going to continue to add to those goals. And obviously those goals are laudable. But I recognize that when we look at the goals that we set at Waste Management, we look at them through the waste management lens, right? When you think about sustainability and you think about the networks developed around sustainability, we all look at the world through a particular lens. And there's really nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is to say, okay, I recognize that Waste Management looks at the world through our lens. And what is in our lens? We're a for-profit company, obviously. We're a company that's built to serve our communities. We have the different lenses that we look through that are the waste management lenses. But I realize that the other networks that we interact with don't look at the world through the same lens. And so you can do one of two things. You can say, well, okay, they look at the world through a different lens. Let's forget about that and look at the world through our lens. Or you can say, how do we work with those networks to try to see the world through their lens? Because if you don't, that's where you get into the dangerous things that happen, whether it's at a company, at a government, or within a network. When you stop looking outside of your network to understand how people outside of your network view you and what you do, that's when you start to stagnate. And so what we've committed to doing is not only interacting with networks, but helping to build networks so that we can learn more about what the lens that other folks look at our business is, and we can then take that and shape it into what we look at for the strategy for waste management going forward. And so, you know, that's all very well and good, but what do we ultimately do with this? I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done looking at the world through the lens of other networks, and talk a little bit about what waste management has done to change itself to meet the needs of those networks. I'm going to start out with General Motors. You know, we all know General Motors, very big manufacturer, and General Motors has a number of manufacturing plants throughout the United States. Well, General Motors came to us and they said, look, we would love for you to take our plants and turn them into zero waste manufacturing facilities. Now, when the name of your company is Waste Management, and someone comes to you and says, we want to turn something into zero waste, you know, that sounds like a pretty big threat to your business model. And we looked at that and we said, you know, that is a threat to our business model, but there's also an opportunity in there, right? So in other words, we could have looked at it and said, we're going to look at this through the waste management lens. And I will tell you, there are plenty of people in our industry that look at it at that lens and say, what we're going to do when someone talks about zero waste is we are going to fight that tooth and nail. And we're going to say that that can never happen. Let's fight it. Let's just make sure that it doesn't happen. At Waste Management, we said, you know what? Let's find the opportunity in zero waste. And General Motors is a perfect example of how we did that. We took General Motors and we did just that. We brought them down to zero waste. Now, you might say zero waste for waste management means zero profitability, right? So how are you meeting the needs of waste management even though you're meeting the needs of General Motors? Well, it's pretty simple. The way we got them to zero waste is not by doing different things with their waste. The way we got them to zero waste was not looking at their waste as waste, right? We looked at their waste as materials, materials that you could do different things with to extract value out of them. So whether it's reusing them, recycling them, or creating energy out of them, we found things that we could do with those materials that actually created a revenue stream that allowed waste management to make more profit and allowed General Motors to lower their overall cost. That's the power of two networks coming together. We did the same thing with Toyota in San Antonio. We went to San Antonio and Toyota wanted a solution that would be a zero waste solution for their manufacturing plant in San Antonio. And so once again, we said, okay, how can we innovate? How can we do something completely different? How can we do something that no one else in our industry is doing to help the Toyota plant become more sustainable and drive towards zero waste? So we came up with another innovative solution. We took the materials that are produced at the plant in San Antonio and we put them through a process where we create pelletized fuel. Now, this pelletized fuel can burn just like coal. It has the BTU content of coal, but what it doesn't have is the particulates of coal. It only has about 10% of the particulates of coal, so you reduce the particulates by 90%. So once again, we came up with this innovative solution to meet the needs of a customer. We could have never understood that unless we sat with the customer, sat with those folks in that network and said, what are your needs? And how can we look outside of our lens and understand how to meet those needs? You know, we're sitting here in San Francisco, and we've got a perfect example right here in the Bay Area of where we interact with one of the other communities, one of the other networks that we deal with, and that's the cities that we serve. So we pick up waste mostly in the East Bay, from Oakland to Emeryville and Hayward. We pick up waste throughout the East Bay. And we bring that waste to a landfill in the East Bay, and that landfill has been there for many years. Now, what did that landfill do in the past? In the past, that waste came in, the waste biodegrades, it creates methane gas. You flare the methane gas so that it doesn't harm the environment, and everybody supposedly is happy. What we did is we said, how can we take that landfill gas and find an innovative solution for the waste that our cities are bringing to us? So what we did was we built a plant. You can drive right out the 580 freeway and see it at the Altamont landfill. We built a plant that takes that methane gas and converts it into liquefied natural gas. So the trucks that carry the garbage for the East Bay dump off the waste into our landfill, and what do? They refuel using the very same fuel that they are dumping into our landfill, converted methane gas into LNG. The beauty of it is that LNG, again, is reduces greenhouse gases by about 90% as opposed to diesel. So what we've done is created this environmental closed loop that drives sustainability throughout the Bay Area. You know, when you think about it, we also have another network we interact with, and that's our communities. And, you know, we send our 17,000 drivers throughout the United States into every one of your communities every day. And obviously, they have the job of picking up the waste that you generate. But what we said is, you know what? We've got these 17,000 of our drivers that are in communities every day. How can we help them meet the needs of those communities beyond just picking up their waste? So we pioneered a program that we call Waste Watch. We have 17,000 individuals that are driving in your communities every day. And we said, look, what we want you to do is we want you to be the eyes and ears of those communities. So when you see something that needs to be reported, when you see something that someone's life is in danger, you need to be able to do something with it. By the way, these 17,000 drivers also have communication devices in their trucks, so they're very able to get very quick responses. So we've got examples throughout the country where our drivers have pulled people out of burning buildings, where our drivers have reported and stopped crimes. You know, they're doing things way beyond just picking up the waste that you generate throughout the United States. And so, you know, those are some of the networks that we deal with every day. You know, we do so many things that no one really understands, and we do so many things with the waste that you generate that nobody understands the value that is in the materials that we collect every day. You know, when we started to look at the materials that we collect in our trucks every day, we realized that we're a company of about $14 billion in revenue, right? When we looked at the materials that we're picking up every day, we realized that if we could separate those and sell them for their constituent value, we had about $12 billion of revenue sitting in our trucks. And what were we doing with it? We were bringing it to landfills and disposing of it, never to be seen again. So we need to understand how to unlock that value. Now, we can't do that without interacting with the networks that you all belong to throughout the country, whether it's in your community or in your company, whether it's through an NGO or through the governments. We can't do that without all getting together and understanding how to unlock the value in that waste. And so, you know, the last thing I'd like to say is that discussion needs to be a discussion that is free-flowing, right? Too often, when you get into a room with a government or an NGO or a business or a city or a community, you know, too often they end up talking past each other and not to each other, right? And the one thing that we're committed to at Waste Management is making sure that we talk to people, that we listen to people. Look, we all see what happens when people talk past each other. I mean, it's called the federal government, right? We've all seen what happens there. Nothing gets done. The one thing we've committed to at Waste Management is to say, we're going to understand the networks. We're going to help build some of the networks that might say some things to us that we don't want to hear. But we want to hear those things because we know those will make us a better company. And we also know that we all have the same common goal. This network might have a lot of different and divergent interests, but we all have the same common goal. What is that goal? You know, Marina talked about 1964. And as someone that was born in 1960, it reminded me of the famous phrase about growing up in the 1960s. I think the phrase is that anyone that remembers the 1960s really didn't grow up in them. And so, you know, that was a generation that is known as my generation, maybe, known as the peace and love generation. But I always think about my father's generation. You know, they're known as the greatest generation because they fought in World War II. So the question is, what are we going to leave? What mark is our generation going to leave? Well, you know, there's something that has never been done in the history of the world, and I think it would be a great legacy for this generation to leave. It has never been done that a generation has left the planet to the next generation in better shape than they inherited it. And as someone that has 3 young boys, I would love that to be my legacy, to leave them a planet in better shape than I inherited it. And we've got a little piece here from the AMC show, The Pitch, that actually talks a little bit about how Waste Management is going to act to help make that a reality. So if you can run the commercial.
Give us your worn out, your unwanted, the bagged up bundles you yearn to cast aside. Give us your wrappers and cans, boxes and bottles. Give us your plastics and metals, your I'm done with you now petrochemical products. Give us your used hypos and the electronics that long ago ceased to amuse. Give us your wretched refuse. For to us, these are precious resources, and we know what to do with them. We will transfer and transform what you give us into new citizens, into the goods and fuels that will power our future. We will safely store what you call unusable until we find its new use. We will make the worthless worthwhile. And we will return all of this to you, that you may continue to enjoy the many splendid gifts of this wonderful world we live in.
That's great. Thank you, thank you. Oh, that was great. Thank you, David. So I want to jump right into the issue or the idea that you ended your talk with. And this is the idea, and you gave some illustration of it, that though we as a network or as a broader community might share this very inspiring high-level goal, you don't have to go too much deeper than that to find all kinds of interests and approaches that differ a lot. So let's have a little bit of a conversation, and maybe we could use some of the challenges you're working on right now, maybe organics or something else, to say, what is it going to take? How do you do that? And how do you build the kind of network, and maybe it's a process, maybe it's about who participates, where you can name those interests, be clear about the goal, name those interests, work through it, and make it happen. And just before you start, if we're going to do organics, given our audience in particular, we're not talking about organic food as opposed to inorganic food. We're talking about organic waste as opposed to inorganic waste. Anything that's fresh that spoils or whatnot.
Well, you know, look, I always say that you can make things happen in a business if there's something profitable that's going to happen. Businesses will drive to profitability, right? But you have to have the whole network profitable. And you also have to have some other interests that support it, right? So I've always said, if you can get business, governments, customers, and NGOs, sort of the four pillars, if you can get all of those driving in the same direction, that's when you really have achievement, right? I mean, in other words, we might do something that's profitable that a government doesn't like, so they regulate it. Or a government might do something that they want to do, but it's not profitable, so we don't like it, right? If you can get all four of those working together, then you've got a viable solution. Look, California is the perfect example of that, right? We recycle a lot of glass, and glass is not an economic material for us to recycle. So the state of California subsidizes glass, right? What does that do? It helps us make it economical. We can then drive it back into the stream of commerce, and everybody's goal is met. But sometimes we don't have those conversations in a room to say, okay, you want this, and we want this, and you know, a government might want this, an NGO might want this, customers want this, waste management wants this. Where do we find the common ground? We end up talking past each other. And so, you know, a government will pass a regulation that says, you know, you can't put organics into your landfills, right? Now, look, I would say that that's not an unusual thing. That's not something that, on its face, seems like it would be controversial at all. But what's the problem with that? One, there's really not a profitable nationwide network to manage all that organics. It's 30% of the waste stream, and so it's a huge part of the waste stream. You can make a little bit of money on a little bit of organics, but on that 30%, you know, 100 million tons, there is no economical solution. The other thing that happens is, you know, I talked about our Altamont landfill where we create liquefied natural gas. How does that happen? The biodegradation of organics. So you take organics out of the landfills, and all you have in there are materials that don't biodegrade, don't create methane gas, and you can't get that beneficial reuse out of them, right? And so I'm not saying that, that I have the solution. What I'm saying is that we have some common understandings, that governments have some common understandings. We need to make sure that they get together and they both that we're trying to meet in the middle. NGOs have understandings, customers have understandings. We all need to make sure we meet in the middle. I was sitting with some customers that create a lot of organics. They're the grocers, right? And I was speaking with them, and I said, look, I can solve your organic problem tomorrow. I can take all the organics that everyone in this room generates, and I can create power out of them. I can create compost out of them. I can create pelletized fuel out of them. I can solve your problem tomorrow. And they all got big smiles on their face. And I said, now, it's going to cost you a little bit more. And the air comes right out of the room, right? And so you've got to understand that the different constituencies have different interests. And how can we do something that is the best way to try to meet all those interests? Because otherwise you're going to get people working at cross purposes, and that doesn't do any good for anyone.
Say, and in that context, when we were talking earlier, you talked about one of the essential ingredients in breaking through a situation like that might be the presence of an honest broker. Mm-hmm. Say a little bit more about that. Near and dear to our heart, as that's a role we often seek to play in some of the collaborations that we work on.
Yeah, well, I think, for example, zero waste is a great example of that, right? So, I guarantee you that no one in our industry believes that zero waste, one, is achievable, or two, is profitable, right? And but what is the definition of zero waste, right? And so everyone has this view of what zero waste is, but no one has a true definition of how do I certify that this GM plant or this Toyota plant is zero waste, right? You need to understand that that it's not just a concept that drives waste management. It's not just a concept that is nice to talk about. It's how do you get someone to define it so that we can all come to a common understanding. Now, look, I readily acknowledge that I run a company whose primary purpose is to create value for shareholders. One of our primary purposes is to create value for shareholders. And so I will tell you that I cannot look at the question of zero waste in an unbiased manner. And I'll just tell you that completely honestly. The same thing goes for governments, right? Governments can't look at zero waste. There's a lot of zero waste. There's a lot of zero waste goals, but zero waste is just a goal for some governments. They don't recognize that some of those materials, what we talked about earlier, some of those materials that are hard to recycle aren't ending up being recycled. They're just being disposed of in a way that you can call zero waste. So, for example, a lot of people that do zero waste say we're zero waste because we put this stuff into a waste to energy plant. Well, about 40% of that comes out as ash and goes, guess what, into a landfill. So it's sort of hard to call yourself zero waste or zero landfill. So the point is that we all have the lens that we look at zero waste. Who's going to step into the middle and say, look, here's how you define zero waste in a way that is acceptable to all the different constituencies, right? I can't do that because I have too much skin in the game. I would posit that there are other interested groups that can't do that because they have too much skin in the game. So how do we get someone that says, is it truly economical to recycle glass without a subsidy? I mean, is that really something that we want to do? Or is that something that is not helping zero waste? It's actually creating more waste, right? And so we need to have somebody that can step up and say, we're the ones that can bring all these networks together and help come to a common understanding of how we define the problem. Look, I guarantee you everybody in this room has a problem, and you define that problem the way your network wants to define that problem. Doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just that's the way you define it. And I'm telling you, I define the problems through my lens of waste management. We need to have someone that can step up and say, look, I don't have that lens. I don't have those biases. Let me look at it and understand what a good solution is to try to meet the needs of all these interested networks.
And in that case, I think one of the interesting things that you ended up doing, back to this idea of the honest brokers, is you had your team work with Underwriters Laboratory on a third-party standard so that we get multiple stakeholders coming in, this group without the same kind of skin in the game, helping to create a credible, useful definition of zero waste, which is a great example.
Exactly right. And the other thing is that I will tell you, when I first got this job 10 years ago, one of the first things I talked to our communications group about was let's go out and interact with the NGOs and let's understand how they feel about what we do. And they sort of looked at me and they said, "You're going to talk to the NGOs? There's a lot of them that are opposed to what we do. They don't like the fact that we put it in landfills, even though it's sanitary and safe and everything like that. They still don't like the fact that we put stuff in landfills." And I said, "Why don't they like that?" And they said, "We have no idea. They just don't like it." And I said, "Well, then why don't we have a conversation with them, right? Why don't we bring them to a landfill and show them what we do at a landfill, right? Why don't we both educate each other a little bit, and maybe we'll come to a better solution rather than just continuing to talk past each other and trying to claim that neither one of us has a solution, right? That's not, if our common goal is a more sustainable planet, talking past each other and pointing fingers at each other is not the way to reach the common goal. Sitting down and having that conversation and understanding, oh, now I see why you think what we do might be bad, but let us tell you what we do that we think is good. And sometimes there's some common ground. Now look, there's plenty of times when you can't find the common ground, but I would tell you, I think we're doing not only the planet a disservice, but I think I'm doing my business a disservice if I don't at least listen.
Fantastic. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about, Aaron in his opening remarks mentioned the results of the survey that we put out. We put it out every year, and one of the signature findings this year was that, yes, by all means, these collaborative external networks that we're focused on our theme, super important. We need them to solve the kind of systemic challenges we're working on, but we also need our networks internally. And so here they were talking about the challenge of actually getting the company aligned around its common goals. Right. You scratch it, they have their different interests. You almost could tell the same story about what happens inside of your company. Tell us a little bit about how you have viewed and addressed that challenge.
Yeah.
Getting alignment internally to get the right people in the right parts of the business. I know you created a very interesting new business unit. Many of you may not know that Waste Management has a sustainability services consulting arm. Like, Tom, is that you there? Tom is here. But say a little bit more. You've got very innovative organizational solutions that you've had to work to try and connect the dots.
Yeah, boy. And, as you mentioned, I used to be a lawyer. And when I was a lawyer, I worked in a law firm of, 300-400 lawyers. And people talk about business culture and alignment, and I thought, that doesn't mean anything. We're 400 lawyers. We each have our own way of doing things. We're basically 400 solo practitioners under the same roof, right? And then you go into a company of 50,000 people and you realize there's only two things that matter. There's really only two things that matter: culture and alignment, right? And it takes you a while as a leader to figure that out. And so the question becomes, how do you get people aligned? And I got to tell you, sometimes it's amazing to me how simple it is to be a CEO. It's got to be simple. I can do it. So by definition, it's got to be simple. But it's amazing to me sometimes how people just miss out on that alignment thing, right? So how do you get people aligned? Pretty simple. Bring them in a room, have a conversation. Right? Look, I think businesses in the 30s, 40s, 50s, because everybody served in World War I and World War II, you had business organizations that were command and control. How do you get people aligned? Send out a memo that says do X, right? Take this hill, right? Very sort of militaristic. Growing up in the 60s, I think you can't manage that way. And by the way I manage, as Marina was talking about, the way I manage is going to be obsolete, because the way I manage is to bring people to a common place, have a conversation. I think it's fascinating to talk about, okay, how can you do that without bringing them there, right? I mean, how do you do that on an everyday basis? We'll have a lot of different meetings where we bring our top leaders in and we align around various initiatives, and then we'll say, okay, how do we then bring this out to the broader organization, to 45,000 people? Because that message is completely different at the senior team than it is at our driver level, right? And so how do you connect at the various levels of the organization? And it's fascinating that I think the next generation of CEOs, I do it, but the only way I can do it, going out and meeting people. It's fascinating that I think the next generation of CEOs is going to say, you can't interact with 45,000 people, you can't meet them all. So how do you use, the new networks to gain that alignment? I think it's a great question and something that I think every CEO in the United States ought to be thinking about. How do you use these new networks to help drive alignment? Because again, only two things, culture and alignment, only two things that matter. How do you spread the culture and gain alignment using new networks?
So last question I want to ask you, and then I'm going to be looking out for questions in the audience, so be ready to throw up your hand in just a minute. But I want to go back to the quote that I mentioned when I was introducing you, which I found so interesting. Don't even think about trying to manage against human nature. We have to manage with human nature. And you had a prescription behind that, and I'd love to hear more about it.
Well, when I first got the job as CEO at Waste Management, I did a few things. And one of the first things I did was I looked at the compensation plans and tried to understand how compensation plans motivate folks, right? And that was when I first realized the quote you use, which is, if you manage against human nature, you will fail, right? Human beings are hardwired to do certain things. And if you manage against that rather than with it, you will fail. Now, I think one of the fundamental premises of human nature, like it or not, one of the fundamental premises is generally people are going to do what's good for them, not necessarily what's good for the larger organization, right? And so when we looked at the compensation plans, I said, okay, how can I design a compensation plan that is aligned with the individual interests of everybody at the company, but also is aligned with the overall interests of the company, right? And so everything we do, every initiative we do at Waste Management, we do just that. We say, you can't go out and say, do X, if the person goes back to their office and says, I'm going to do X, and X is going to be bad for me. It's going to be good for the organization, but it's going to be bad for me. It's a pretty rare person that is going to go do X when that's the way you design it, right? And so we try to design everything we do, and every initiative we do, part of that alignment is trying to get folks to understand, look, here's how doing this is going to be good for you. It's also going to be good for the company, we don't deny that, but here's how doing this is going to be good for you. And it's to me, when I talk about alignment, that's a great way to get alignment. When we talk about culture, what we try to have is both a culture of collaboration and accountability. And that's a great way to drive both collaboration and accountability. Make sure they align with the personal interests of the folks that are doing them.
Super. Thank you very much. So I'd like to move now to questions from the audience. Awesome. We've got more hands up than I can deal with. So I'll start with the person I can actually see right up here in front. Please just wait for a second. We'll get a microphone to you. And please just tell us who you are, and where you're from, and your question.
David Wilcox, Reach Scale and CSR Wire. You have an enormous amount of knowledge that you're aggregating and creating with your network inside your organization. And we have a global waste problem with an enormous number of players who are working on the problem in Global South in completely different ways with different models. What is your approach for sharing your knowledge with both collaborators and potentially competitors globally? And are you working to import knowledge from social enterprises, for example, that are working on the waste problem in different ways, and seeing ways that you can merge the two knowledge bases to solve the problem globally?
It's a great question. And, a few years ago, I sat back and said, what are the things that we do better than anybody else in the world, right? And I will tell you, I think at any company, I'm on 2 other boards, and so I get to see those companies, and I get to see a lot of different companies. Look, if you're great at 2 or 3 things, that's pretty impressive. One of the things that we are better at than anybody else in the world, and it took me a while to understand this, because I sort of sit up here and I don't get down and talk with the folks that are actually doing the day-to-day engineering of waste systems. We have the best engineers in the world to not only manage a particular waste system, so to manage a landfill or a recycling facility, but we have the best engineers and technicians in the world at understanding how those systems interact together, right? Now, in the United States, we're sort of given this roadmap already. The infrastructure is already in place. And so, you've got to really work against that infrastructure to create a more efficient system of managing what I'll call the materials, not the waste, right? But there's a lot of places in the world where the infrastructure isn't built out. And so you have a clean slate. And one of the things we've been toying with is how do we take this knowledge that we have and bring it around the globe? Because, look, the waste problem in the United States is completely different than the waste problem in India, which is completely different than the waste problem in China, which is completely different from the waste problem in Europe. And so the first thing we need to do is we need to go understand how those ecosystems are different than ours. And then we can apply our special expertise against it. And so one of the things we've done is we've actually gone overseas to some of these countries to create waste-to-energy plants. It's one of the first steps they're taking in China to manage their waste problems. It's one of the final steps they're taking in Europe to manage their waste problems. And throughout the world, you see folks looking to build waste-to-energy plants because it's a great way to take waste and turn it into a resource. And so what we're doing is we've got to go out and try to understand those ecosystems. The challenge that I've had is that, you might say, okay, Waste Management's a big company, but having that type of reach is very difficult. And so, being at places like this and having folks that are trying to manage those problems in places like India and Dubai, China, and England, the question is, how do you get our two networks together to try to solve that common problem? We're going out to try to do just that, but we're a pretty small organization compared to the whole world. And so, we want to get the word out that we're here to try to help engineer solutions, not just to current waste problems in the United States, but to emerging waste problems around the world.
Super, thank you. In the back center, please, and wait for a microphone.
You can just randomly stand up and, we'll think you have a question.
Hi, my name's Melissa, and I'm with Ambiente Legal. And I wondered, when you discussed your company's 4 laudable sustainability goals, I wondered if you could speak to how those were developed and who within your organization played a role in selecting those 4 out of the panoply of choices that you had.
Yeah, it's a great question. We sort of developed those 4 goals the way we develop everything in the company, which is it's a collaboration, right? All the way from the folks at the front line who have a voice in it, all the way up to the folks in our sustainability groups. And so we decided that we wanted to go in the areas where we had the biggest opportunity to make big change, right? I mean, we could have gone to a lot of different things. Look, a lot of companies have goals to reduce, for example, maybe to reduce electricity usage at their sites or to increase recycling at their sites. And we do have those goals, don't get me wrong, but those are not the goals that we talk about in our sustainability report, because the nature of our business allows us to have goals that have big impact, right? Instead of recycling a couple 100,000 tons at our offices throughout the United States, we can recycle 20 million tons throughout the United States. So we sort of looked at it and said, where are the areas where we think we can make a big difference? And that's in recycling, that's in waste to energy, that's in taking all of the land that we have and trying to make reuse of it. Those are the kind of places. And then obviously our fleet. The fleet was interesting. We put a goal out of 15%, reducing emissions by 15% by 2020. And at the time we put that goal in place, we sort of looked around and said, how are we going to do this without getting a lot of help from the manufacturers, right? I mean, how are we going to get this 15% reduction in emissions? And then guess what happened? The natural gas revolution in the United States, right? So now 90% of the trucks we buy are natural gas fueled. We're buying those natural gas trucks as fast as we can. We're building infrastructure throughout the United States to be able to fuel those with natural gas. And that changed the game for us, right? That allowed us to get to 20% almost overnight by changing out the fleet. That's why I think as we change out our fleet, we can reduce those emissions, I think, ultimately by 50, 75%. And so the way they got developed was the way everything gets developed in our company from a collaborative point of view. And the reason we picked those 4 is that we thought those were the 4 where we could make the biggest impact in the shortest period of time.
Super. We have a question in the back. Please stand up. I'll describe. Yeah, orange. Yes, thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Molly Janus. I'm with Annie's Inc., a waste management customer.
Hopefully a happy waste management customer.
A happy waste management customer. And I'm sure that you're familiar with the hierarchy of waste management developed by the EPA, where source reduction is sort of the most preferable approach from a sustainability systems perspective. And I was wondering if you've figured out how to make money off of source reduction, because I think, I'm very impressed by your company and by the goals that you've set. And I guess what I see as a big problem is the fact that our society is generating more waste than ever. And I can see very easily how you can make money off of all of the other steps in the hierarchy, but I'm wondering if you've figured out source reduction. Thank you.
So, Brad Anderson, who ran Best Buy, is on our board. And, Brad and I had a lot of conversations around what drove Best Buy, and he started talking about the Geek Squad, which was sort of an accidental thing that they found, turned out to be a huge provider of services that you wouldn't really normally associate with an electronics retailer like Best Buy. And we were sort of the same way, right? It's what I talked about. We literally had a 3-day strategy session where we sat in the first day of the strategy session with my senior team, and we went through all the data about sustainability. 90% of the Fortune 500 companies have zero waste goals. All the different statistics that tell you that, again, like I said, when your name's waste management, it sounds like it's not a great path that you're going down. And again, you can take one of two approaches. You can say, we're going to fight this tide, or you can say, we're going to ride this tide, right? And look, that tide cannot be fought. I mean, that if you will, that horse has left the barn. There is no way that we can stop that tide. And by the way, there's no way we'd want to stop that tide. So how do you ride the tide? Well, it's what Eric talked about earlier. Our sustainability services group, what we call our green team, Green Squad, they're the same types as the Geek Squad, where they can go out to a company and they can look at everything they do and they can say, here's how you can take these materials and reuse them or extract value out of them, but also here's how you can reduce the amount of materials you use. So, for example, we're working with someone that many of you in the room probably know, Bill McDonough, to say, how do we meet with our customers to sort of move upstream, right? To move upstream and understand how they can make a product that is more sustainable on the back end, right? I mean, I think producers more and more are worried about what happens to their product after they sell it. And so we started to work with customers to say, how can we use less materials in the product? And for those materials that we do use, how do we take those materials and make sure that they're recyclable? So, for example, we worked with a drink manufacturer that sold fluids in a recyclable container, but the handle of the container, a gallon container, the handle of the container wasn't rigid enough. And so they put a different type of plastic into that container to make the handle more rigid. And guess what happened? That handle now had a different melting point than the rest of the container, so it became unrecyclable, right? So we go into them and we say, let's work on how we can take this container and give you what you need. You need a rigid handle for this container. Your consumers don't want anything, but they won't live without that rigid handle. But how can we take that rigid handle and make sure that putting that handle onto the container doesn't contaminate the whole container so that it can't be recycled, right? And so, that's exactly what we've done. Is we've sort of taken this consultative business model to try to help our customers do exactly that.
Great. So I'm going to ask the last question. Oh, sorry, we have one already spotted. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mark Bauhaus. I'm a partner with Just Business that incubates companies at the intersection of purpose and profit. And that kind of is my question for you. You've internalized making more money, more profit, driving efficiency, new value propositions for stakeholders around this thing we call sustainability. But that was not the case at Waste Management a couple of years ago. So what was it that fundamentally sparked your change in thinking, and what are the challenges that you faced to bring that into the mainstream in your company?
Sure. And look, it's not just our company, it's our industry. And I always say one of my other fundamental premises of tenets of management is that your greatest strength, whether it's as a company or as a person, your greatest strength is always your greatest weakness. My greatest weakness at Waste Management is that I came to Waste Management knowing absolutely nothing about the business, didn't grow up in the business, didn't know anything about the business. And within 3 years, I'm CEO, so I still didn't know a heck of a lot about the business. I have never run an operation at the field level, ever. That is my greatest weakness. My greatest strength is I've never run an operation at the field level. It's the exact same thing. And so, you know, again, it goes back to human nature. When you run something at that level for 10 or 15 years, on the 16th year you go, well, that's the way we do it. We can't do it any differently. So you have to have someone come in with some fresh eyes. So my greatest strength is I don't have those preconceived notions. I don't have this view of our business that it's been this way forever and this is the way it's always going to be. And so, you know, it goes back to that meeting. I mean, it really was a seminal moment at our company when we spent that first day. I can tell you exactly where we were and exactly where we were sitting. And we spent that first day talking about this tide of, you know, zero landfill, zero waste, all the different things that seemed like a threat to us. And we spent the first day, and I will tell you, that was a pretty quiet dinner we had that night. There wasn't a lot of happy talk around dinner. And then we spent the next 2 days saying, okay, look, we got two options. We can fight this tide, we can ride this tide. Can't fight it. So how do we ride it? What are the opportunities? I always like to say there's this Chinese symbol that is the exact same symbol for threat, and that exact same symbol in Chinese means opportunity. So they've understood it for thousands of years, that every threat to a business is an opportunity. My job is how do you turn that threat into an opportunity, and that's the transformation of waste management.
Super. What a great note to end on. Please join me in thanking David for a great session. Thank you so much. It was terrific. Thank you. And I'm looking down at my conference director. Melanie, are we done for break? We are. Excellent. You now have a half-hour networking break. Go enjoy.